بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The Holy Messenger of Allah is quoted to have said, لو كان العقل رجلا لكان الحسن. If the intellect, if the faculty of reason was personified in a man, it would be none other than Hassan. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam has virtues greater than what anyone could enumerate or articulate. But in this episode, I'd like to draw your attention to one aspect of the character and moral traits of Imam al-Hassan. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. It's a story that many of you are familiar with. You've heard it over and over again from pulpits. And it's quite familiar, but I'd like to try and elucidate the story perhaps from a different angle. One day, Imam al-Hassan is walking in the streets of Medina when a man from Sham, a man from present-day Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, this large area which was referred to collectively as Ash-Sham and was under the control of Muawiyah, Imam Hassan's arch nemesis, his sworn enemy, a person who eventually succeeded in murdering and assassinating Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. He was in control of those lands. And Muawiyah was famous for employing the most vicious, brutal, ruthless campaign of misinformation and propaganda against Imam al-Hassan in order to undermine his legitimacy and credibility and to encourage people to support his fight, his unjust, unholy war against Imam al-Hassan. And this man happened to be a victim of all of that misinformation and black propaganda. So much so that he became an extremist in this cause. Much like what you see in this day and age, there is a massive Islamophobia industrial complex, organizations that fund the misinformation campaign against Islam. And the victims of that misinformation are usually people who are disenfranchised, people who have mental health issues, individuals who are indoctrinated and radicalized against Islam and against Muslims. When you hear of an anti-Muslim attack, a terror attack against a mosque, against a group of Muslim worshippers, usually the perpetrator of that crime is a victim of this misinformation campaign. And the media usually focuses on this individual and his motives and his manifesto and the people that he admires. But the real focus shouldn't be on that individual, because ultimately they are victims of a larger plot to demonize Islam and to demonize Muslims. And it's those organizations that stand behind this misinformation campaign, those who spread this vitriolic hate and venomous scorn against Islam and Muslims. They're the ones who need to be held to account. They're the ones who need to be stopped. Those hate preachers need to be prevented from spreading their hate-filled material and content far and wide. And so this person was another victim of this misinformation campaign, but of course he had been radicalized. He had been turned into what you might call, he had been weaponized against Imam al-Hassan. So much so that he came all the way from Sham to Medina in order to bring about some harm, to perhaps try and kill Imam al-Hassan or do something along those lines. So he approaches the Imam in the middle of the street. And he began by cussing the Imam. He started out by spewing out all the vulgar profanities that you can imagine. He swore at Imam al-Hassan. He swore at his father, Amir al-Mu'mineen, his mother, the pure daughter of Rasulullah, Fatimah al-Zahra. He swore at Imam al-Hussein. He basically, everything he had, he spewed out. Imam al-Hassan did not even interrupt him. Listen carefully, brothers and sisters. He didn't even stop the man. He didn't react. He didn't respond. He simply waited for him to finish venting. When the man finished, then the Imam smiled and looked at him. Not in a patronizing way, in a loving, compassionate way. He smiled and said, "Old man, you look like a stranger. You look like you're from out of town. If you're in need of something, then I'm here to help you. If you need shelter, my home will be your shelter. If you need food, then we will feed you. If you need a problem to be resolved, then I will be at your service. Whatever you need, come to me and I'll be more than happy to help." Then the Imam said to him, "Bring your horse over to my house. What do you say you spend the night here and just be my guest?" Arabs had this practice of inviting guests to their homes. And the Imam did this not just to a total stranger, but to a sworn enemy, to someone who was there to bring harm to the Imam, who tried to humiliate the Imam. But the way the Imam responded to him was such that, imagine if you have a fire and you pour cold water over it. The man was struck by the graciousness and the sheer generosity and compassion and kindness and forgiveness of Imam al-Hassan al-Mujtaba, alayhi alaf al-tahiyyati was-salam. And so he said to the Imam, "Fine, you've invited me to your home, I'll come to your home." So he went to the Imam's house. He was a guest there for 3 days and 3 nights. After which he looked at the Imam and he said, "By God, Allahu a'lamu haythu yada'u risalatah." God knows who to send as messengers. God is all-knowing. And the fact that He has chosen you and your father and your mother and your family and your household and your grandfather to represent Him on this earth shows God's greatness. And then he said, "When I came here, I had no one that I despised more than you and your father. And by God, I now leave, having loved no one more than you and your father." Now, we've heard the story before, and it's a moving, touching tale of compassion and forgiveness, of how to deal with an enemy, with a foe, with an adversary, someone who wants to hurt you. And by responding in the exact opposite manner, by treating them with kindness and compassion, you can neutralize them. This is a law, brothers and sisters, that is the farthest thing from Machiavellian philosophy, right? Niccolò Machiavelli preaches the opposite. He says that you need to be harsh and stern and strong. You need to be tough. Have you never heard people say that? You have to be tough. You have to treat your enemies in such a way so that they can't even get up, that they continue to kneel down before your might and your power. But the Ahlulbayt preach a very different approach to life. Imam al-Hassan is teaching us that if you want to neutralize your enemy, you do not respond with toughness and power. You respond with kindness and forgiveness. There's no better way to neutralize an enemy without shedding a drop of blood, without experiencing any vengeful hate or hurtful feelings on both sides, than to treat them in a manner that would neutralize that fire, right? Show them what it's like to be good as opposed to react in an equal but opposite manner. And so while we've heard the story and we kind of sympathize and we kind of try and understand, brothers and sisters, this story and this incident doesn't just teach us how to treat our enemies. It teaches us how to treat those closest to us. Imagine if husbands and wives, spouses in a family, adopted this legend of Imam al-Hassan, this character trait, in their everyday lives. Imagine if when your spouse acts in a grumpy manner and says something hurtful, instead of responding to them by reminding them of how bad they are and how they owe you and how you've done them a favor but they never paid you back for it. Imagine if instead of that you respond with kindness, you respond with compassion. Imagine if you responded to a vitriolic verbal attack, you reacted by simply smiling and saying, "Can I help you with something? I know you look tired. You've worked hard all day. You seem to need a break. How about you go take a break while I wash the dishes or look after the kids or do this or the other?" Imagine, brothers and sisters, if this story was implemented in our lives. This is Imam al-Hassan, yes. You might say Imam al-Hassan is different. Imam al-Hassan. Who could be like Imam al-Hassan? لو كان العقل رجلا لكان الحسن. He represents the personification and epitome of intellect and the power of reason. Yes, that's true. But in this space of responding to harshness and hurtful comments and actions with kindness, we can all emulate this. We can all mimic this. We can do it, especially when the other person isn't an enemy. The other person is your brother, sister, wife, husband, father, mother, colleague, friend. Brothers and sisters, let's take this story of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. If you take no other story, if you don't try to follow in the footsteps of Imam al-Hassan in any other area but this one, it's worth it. And I guarantee that you can see the results of your good actions instantaneously. It has an immediate effect because that's how the nature of people is, right? Our nature is we respond to kindness. We respond to compassion. We respond to people who are good to us. If someone gave you a gift, a random person came up to you in the street and gave you a gift, and you know that this gift has no strings attached, how do you respond? You always say, "Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, you didn't have to do this." And yet you did, right? If you go above and beyond your duty of care as a husband or wife, and you do to your spouse things that they probably never even expected from you, right? That's what generosity is. There's a hadith where Imam Ali alayhi salam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, asks his son Imam al-Hassan, "Sa'alahu mal jud?" He said to him, "What is the meaning of jud?" You see, in Arabic, that's why the Arabic language is so vast and so deep and beautiful. It has such a vast vocabulary and lexicon that for every single situation, there's a word that vividly and accurately characterizes it. And so in English, you say generosity. And of course, there are synonyms to generosity. But in Arabic, it's just so much more nuanced. For example, the word for generosity is karam. Kareem, and it's one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kareem means the generous one. But what does generosity mean? See how nuanced this is? When you give from what you have to another person, that's called generosity. But if you give from what you have to another person without even them asking for it, that's called jud. And you call the person who does that sort of thing and who epitomizes and represents that feature, you call them Jawad. And that's also one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gives it to you without even you asking. And so when you go above and beyond that duty of care, which we talked about, in your relationships, in your familial and relations with people around you within a family, you do things without even being asked, without even being prompted, brothers and sisters, the impact that will have in erasing enmity and animosity and hatred and jealousy and all these things is absolutely mind-boggling, tremendous, inshallah. And so, on that note, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us, to enlighten and illuminate our hearts and our minds with the stories and legends of the lives of Ahlulbayt, in particular Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Mm-hmm.